Welcome to the Advance Impact Legacy Show. I am really excited today to be able to introduce and host a very special gentleman indeed. One of the people that I hold in high esteem and actually rate him personally as within the top 10 of coaches that I know on the planet. Okay. We're joined today by the one and only Mr. Rob Salter. I think in the coaching world, he's definitely London's hidden gem, hidden secret. And I think that's probably worldwide as well. But for those of us that know Rob, we understand his integrity to the quality of coaching, his own personal journey, which I think brings a lot of richness and depth to the coaching experience. And also his spirituality, which he may or may not talk about today, but I think it adds a really bespoke quality angle to the coaching delivery. Now, as many of you know, I'm a sort of coach and coach's coach, and for me to say these things, I don't say them lightly. So without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to Mr. Rob Salter.
Thank you, Matt.
Hey, Rob.
For that kind introduction. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Good to see you.
And you, level.
Yeah, thank you for joining us on this call. I'm really excited and a little bit, I've got to admit, I'm feeling a little bit nervous because I'm sort of, you've got your glasses on and you're in coachy mode. And, so as an interviewer, I want to do my best, but feel free, Rob, to share and disclose, whatever you may. I always like to start these sessions off with, who is Rob Salter? Where are you from? And what are some of those early defining moments that have kind of, paved your way to where you are today, if you don't mind sharing that, Rob?
Sure, no problem. So I'm a Londoner, as you referenced earlier. I now live in North London, in Muswell Hill, and I guess I was introduced to coaching as a teacher. So I spent 30 years teaching, and in fact, I retired this year, took early retirement, which is marvelous. But so I was working in a school probably about 10 years ago, which was a very forward-thinking school, and they decided they wanted to invest in their staff, and they provided free coach training. But there were 2 paid positions at the end of this course for people who wanted to become teacher coaches.
Right.
Now, prior to that, I had created a free website, a free resource for teachers on managing behavior in the classroom, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And so I thought I was really into this coaching idea. Didn't really know what it was, to be honest. So I asked for a free session with another colleague of mine who was a coach. He just asked me loads of questions, which was kind of interesting.
Okay.
And he said absolutely nothing. And I was kind of, this is kind of interesting. And then after a while, I got into the coaching session, and I realized, he wants to listen to me. Okay, fine. That's new and good. So I kind of got hooked on this coaching idea. Luckily, I got one of those paid positions, and I became a teaching and learning coach. That's where I fell in love with coaching. And then when I left education, I had a sort of break before I retired, and I started I think I wrote this on my bio. I started an educational consultancy, and I was working remotely with schools, coaching teachers virtually, going into schools, training staff, doing what they call in-service training for teachers around behavior management, but also children with learning difficulties. And that was kind of the beginning of my coaching journey.
Great. So, I mean, just to rewind a little bit, when you were a young, lad, like most of us in London, probably riding your bicycle around the streets and playing a bit of football, licking apples off the neighbour's tree, maybe. Did you ever think that you would get into coaching, or this type of field? I mean, was that
No,
anything you thought?
my dream was to be an actor.
Ah, okay, interesting.
Probably not when I was climbing trees. I think my dream then was, I don't know if I had dreams at that point. Um, but certainly when I was at school, I had a drama teacher who really inspired me. In fact, I became a drama
Wow.
teacher for quite a
Okay.
long time. But I wanted to be an actor. I got hooked. I got the bug, and actually, a lot of my acting training ended up in my coaching of teachers, because I had a realization one day. I'd spent a lesson teaching my A-level drama class how to act. You know,
Right.
what do you have to do? How do you become someone else? How do you believe that you are who you say you are? And then
Mhm.
in my next lesson, I was observing a young teacher who was not very confident, didn't believe that he was
Right.
who he said he was as a
Yeah.
teacher. And something in my mind clicked, and I thought, hold on a minute, these two. So I started teaching acting technique to teachers, and that was kind of the basis of my work in managing behavior. I wrote a couple of books based on it. One was about classroom presence, which came
Right.
as a result of having
Mhm.
my ideas out there on my website. Educational publisher contacted me. So I was kind of going down that very much educational route for quite a long time.
Interesting. Really, really interesting how the acting has kind of fed into your coaching work with teaching. And I'm guessing a large part of that would be the state management, right? Because actors are usually masters of that being piece. Is that correct, or
That,
have I gone
that is
offline a
correct.
little?
No, that is very true, Matt. But that piece of the jigsaw only really fell into place the last 5 years or so, when
Okay,
I discovered the three principles, which maybe we'll talk about later. But
I'd love to.
that was my route into managing my state and making sure that I was not reactive to what the children were
Right.
doing. Because as soon as you get into that mode, you've lost the game completely.
Yeah, it's pretty much 90% of the world's problems are because of reactive responses, I guess.
Yes.
I would imagine.
Yeah.
Really interesting. I mean, I know a lot of teachers while we're on the education
Mhm.
piece for now, because I do want to dig into your coaching and the three principles and all of that good stuff, Rob, and a little bit of current affairs maybe as well. But while we're on the education bit, I've got quite a few friends who are teachers in the UK, okay, mostly in London,
Yeah.
and largely, without generalizing, because it's just my friends and my experience and what's been fed back to me,
Mhm.
um, they seem to be having a really tough time with their role in schools, secondary schools especially, with the pandemic, with all of the stuff that came post lockdowns, with some of the domestic changes that families have gone through, with the confusion and everything else. What would you sort of say to those people who are in teaching right now, and maybe just don't know where to go from here? What, because your journey really has been about sort of, evolving out of that, but then there will be career teachers that are meant to be teaching. It's their purpose. And what do
Yeah.
you say to those people, Rob, if you have anything to say to them?
To be honest, Matt, people watching this, if I could have one sort of wish for what they might learn or what they might do after watching this, it is just to go and check out the three principles as an idea and
Right.
apply it to your teaching. I've actually I don't want to sort of give too many links or whatever, but I've created a YouTube channel fairly recently where I actually talk about this. And there is a specific book that I used to use, written by a coach, a three principles coach. And what is amazing about this book is that it just grounds you. It grounds your mind and your thinking. It's quite extraordinary how he's written this thing. And
Wow.
I used to use that before I went into work. And the reason I would use it is because after I became calm and grounded, I would not be nearly as reactive to the
Right.
children. So I would be able to go about my day, um, my rule of thumb was I'm going to walk into work happy and I'm going to leave happy, and whatever happens between then is whatever happens. Because if you've ever taught, I mean, if you've got kids, you'll know this anyway. It can be very fraught, and they can get very emotional, and they can be very reactive to things. And of course, the whole pandemic has thrown everything up in the air for kids.
Yeah.
A lot of them don't know where they are. They were told to be learning online, and now they're told to forget all about that and come back into school. They're very confused,
Right.
and that's totally understandable. So that's going to make things harder for teachers than it already was. So I think it's even more important to get a handle on what you just described as state management, if you can.
Right. Absolutely. And that, of course, feeds into emotional intelligence and so much more.
Yeah.
But I think that idea of state management, when I'm on a sales call or if I'm doing a negotiation in a business meeting, I know that the most important thing is for me to get into state, which isn't sort of necessarily a high-powered state. It could be a very silent state. It could be a very grounded state. It could be a very fluid state. But
Yeah.
I know for me personally, that's really, really key. And I think when I've served clients at my best, I've been in state and been flexible to sort of dance with the state that they find themselves in and move them, sort of forward.
I would add something to that. I agree with
Yes.
everything you said, and I would simply add, and not to be influenced by their state, because obviously you're choosing a state to come in with. They're having, particularly young people, their state might change in the moment, and so it's massively important to keep your state stable for them. They need that.
That's very, very true. And I'm guessing I haven't worked a lot with young people. Don't have enough grey hairs, I think, I need to work on my patience a little bit. Mine are coming. But I have noticed that people that have worked in depth from the heart with young people seem to gain a real wealth of experience. And I'm guessing that has kind of fed into everything that you do as well, Rob, right?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the jobs that I loved actually the most, and I do miss that aspect of it. I had it might sound strange, but I had the good fortune to work in a secure psychiatric unit in a school. And this unit was for children with eating disorders. And I worked in 2 of those units based on connections that I had from teaching.
Right.
And watching, I think the reason that I felt so blessed to be able to do this work was because you're actually able to witness children coming in at such a low level, at such a crisis point. And you meet them to begin with at that crisis point with their parents who are obviously tearing their hair out. They don't understand what's going on. And you can be part of the process. It's a massive team process, of course, but you could be part of the process of them rebuilding themselves and rebuilding their lives. And by the time they leave, I mean, it's a fairly draconian environment because it needs to be, but by the time they leave, they are a different person. And that's wonderful to be able to see. But you're absolutely right. I think the key there is, as this is something else you'll relate to, is rapport. So how deeply are you able to create rapport with a young person to the point where they will trust an adult in an environment where they don't trust any adults? Because a lot of what's gone on is systemic stuff around the way that they feel about their education, their parenting, their this, their that, their mental health, maybe what's going on social media, their friends. And so for you as an adult to create that trust with that young person is part of the thing that aids their recovery. And it's a privilege to be able to do that.
Wow, that's some real light bulb moments going off for me there, because I, in the past, have tended to kind of just rush in speak to the young person who in reality is not even listening, and try to give them an instruction because I'm older than you and I've got a beard, right? And it doesn't work. I mean, it's just like, doesn't work. But I remember one day, one of the churches in Bedford volunteered me to go and speak to a load of young kids on an estate. Now, Bedford's not very rough, but they do have some areas which are sort of, like most of the country, their families which are struggling and stuff like that. And so I had to go and speak to these like 20, 30 kids who were like 13, 14. And I really didn't want to do it because I didn't know what to say to them, right? And as I was getting ready and sort of meditating and kind of planning to this talk, something just came in my mind. Go and buy yourself a really nice pair of trainers. Because I was a typical dad who kind of got all the kids the nice trainers, and I had a pair of old Dunlops. They weren't really, but and so I went and treated myself to a really nice pair of trainers. And I kid you not, Rob, I sat in that room and they were all looking at my trainers, and I had them all, and it was just incredible. I think my son nicked my trainers like about 3 weeks later, but they were all looking at my trainers. Now, there's any young people watching, please, please, please don't be insulted. I know you're not all about the trainers, but in this scenario, it was the right piece of communication, because they thought, he's all right, him. He's like, he's kind of cool. He's old, but he's kind of cool. And then we just built a rapport from there, and it just kind of flowed. But for me, that was something I would never do, but that rapport is so key, isn't it?
So my kind of rule of thumb when I was first started teaching, I don't really know where this I know I do know where it came from. I did a lot of youth work before I started teaching. And so teaching actually became kind of an extension of the youth work that I did. But certainly as a youth worker, you have to go into any interaction with a young person accepting who they are first. So if I just spoke to them on what they might say on a level, I just accepted them. I didn't try and play a role. I didn't try and impose or dominate or impose my will, what have you. It worked. I'll give you an example of that. You're talking about this youth club that you went to. I must have spent about 4 years at one point in my career doing supply teaching, and I chose to do supply teaching because I was writing plays at the time. So I didn't want to have too much time, planning and preparing and marking. And I worked in some pretty rough schools. I'm not going to say where, but pretty hair-raising schools. And the way I managed to do it was to come in. So normally you'd be given a pile of work, you'd be shown where the room is, you open the door, you take a sharp intake of breath. Really? I've got to deal with those. And then I would walk in and I would go and give a sheet of paper to each individual child in the class and say hello.
Wow.
And simply create rapport very, very quickly with as many individuals as possible. And once I'd done that, I'd go to the front of the class and then start behaving as a teacher.
Love it.
But I accepted them as individuals first, so that when I played the teacher role, which they expected me to do, I didn't get that pushback. Oh, you're not our usual teacher. Who are you? Let's do this, right?
Yeah.
Just my way of. So it's very similar to the trainers thing. You find something, just anything, to create that connection.
It's amazing, because just as you're relaying that experience and that tool that you've used really, really well there, I can just see that the barriers are dissolving, because you've accepted them, you've said hello. They're not even relating to you as a teacher.
No. And it's really surprising for them as well, because teachers don't do that.
Yeah. So we will get into, coaching, but I'm just very interested on this point. I know some of the viewers will be. why is this stuff? I know you're a clever guy, Rob, but there must be other people from the educational world thinking along these lines, right? Why isn't this taught? Why isn't it implemented? In the UK, you know, they've spent a lot of money on these free schools and loads of different stuff. Why hasn't anyone implemented any of this stuff? You know what? Or have they? And it just
don't get me started, Matt. Yeah, we could be here for a very
is that
long
another show? That's another show.
I'll try and put it briefly. I mean, this may not be the answer that you're looking for, but I'll give it to you anyway. Part of the research that I've done, I want to write a book about this,
Right.
Because I agree with you completely. But so I was put onto a piece of writing, and I'm trying to remember the name of the philosopher, and obviously it's just skipped my mind, but it'll come back to me. He talks about the John Stuart Mill. He wrote an essay called On Liberty, and he makes a distinction between mediocrity and excellence.
Right.
And he basically says institutions breed mediocrity rather than excellence. Right. So back in the day, before there was formal education, the children of the rich would be educated by private tutors. The education system as it is has come about as a result of the Industrial Revolution and the need for mass literacy and numeracy. But effectively, these institutions are machines. If you think about it, they're basically machines. So a tutor might have taught you 4 or 5 different subjects, and we decide randomly to split the subjects up amongst different specialist teachers, and the children go like on a production line from lesson to lesson to lesson. So what's the oil that keeps the machine moving? It's coercion, isn't it? It's discipline. And back in the day, that discipline was enforced corporal punishment.
Yeah, physical, yeah.
Right? So once that was taken away, nothing was put in its place. And I remember clearly going to work in my first school where there were some teachers who'd been at the end of their career, who'd had 40-year teaching careers, and they started their careers, some of them being the people that implemented the corporal punishment.
Right.
And then when corporal punishment was taken off table, these people were left without any kind of they hadn't developed any discipline skills, they hadn't developed any rapports because they didn't need them.
Yeah.
And they were left floundering.
Right.
So new teachers coming in have got this kind of institutional difficulty to navigate, as well as what it does to them personally. I mean, I was funny before we spoke, I was on Twitter this morning, and there was a newly qualified teacher who just resigned after half a term. And she was just saying, I've never experienced mental health problems like that. And that stress that you experience in your first year, all teachers will recognize that. It's real. It is real. So what I was trying to do with my teaching, with my training and coaching, is to work with teachers in their first year and just give them those skills.
Yeah.
The answer to the question is, why is it not available? That's a great question.
Yeah. Great. Well, it was a great answer, Rob, and it makes perfect sense to me. I went to a school where I think 3 years before or 5 years before they'd stopped the corporal punishment. But of course, the old boys who were sort of coming up to retirement, they still had the cane and the slipper in the drawer. And they were not stopping it for anyone. Okay. So we still got it. It wasn't as formal. And but yeah, we still had it, even though it was totally illegal. And of course, in those days, most of us wouldn't really make too much noise about it.
No.
And parents generally complied. There was the odd one that didn't, but most parents generally would comply. But yeah, I saw some awful things of, one student in particular taking a real beating by the PE staff.
It was always the PE staff, always.
Was it? Is that a pattern?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know why. Just sorry if there's any PE teachers.
Yeah. Yeah. But this guy, yeah, he's recently got in touch with me on Facebook, and he's lost his mental health and everything, like totally. He's just fallen apart.
Wow.
But hey, that is what it is. So Rob, I know coaching wise, you've brought a lot of that experience of dealing with youth and dealing with other teachers in institutions which maybe have tried to limit people's potential to some extent, and you bring that into your coaching. And I know you've gone through a lot of coaching modalities. You're very rich in terms of coaching sources, which I think is really, really important. But I know you had a bit of a hiatus with the free principles. I know you're not a pure free principles person because there's a lot more in your toolbox. But I know definitely we had a conversation about the free principles. And for those viewers that don't know what the free principles are, we're going to get into it. It's a very important aspect of coaching. It's a huge contribution to the coaching, fraternity, if you like. So, Rob, would you sort of, in simple language, sort of tell us what the free principles are, why they're important, and why you really sort of gelled with them and have utilized them? Would that be okay?
Yeah, of course. Again, sorry to plug my YouTube channel, but there's a whole video on there about it, but I'll just praise it. So the three principles are mind, thought, and consciousness. Oops, I keep going the other one. So I will use a metaphor. I think we both like metaphors. So if you imagine you're in a cinema, if you think about when you walk into the cinema, they turn the lights down. So why do they turn the lights down in the cinema? Because they want you to suspend your disbelief. And they want you to believe that what you see on the screen is reality.
Right.
Okay. So if you, I'll start with this bit. So you go in, you watch the movie, and I don't know about you, but when I walk out the cinema, I often have this feeling of being disoriented. And you go back into reality and you're kind of like, oh, that's the real world. Right. So if we use these principles, if you imagine the projection booth in the back of the cinema, the film going through the camera are your thoughts. The light projecting the movie onto the screen is your consciousness. So what you're seeing throughout your day is actually a projected image that your thoughts and your consciousness are creating.
Okay.
It's like being in a cinema. And then when you walk out of the cinema, you come into the last part, which is called mind, which is who you really are. So I'm going to give you a quote that I just wrote down this morning because I think I was explaining to you I have this morning ritual, and part of it is reading a bit of three principles. This is not the sweet sharing book. This is another book by an amazing three principles coach called Amy Johnson, and she writes this. She says, we never say I am my breath or I am my heartbeat, but we do say I am my thoughts. So for some strange reason, we believe that the image that's on the screen is real. And the reality is we are creating our experience of life through our thinking moment by moment. And it's our thinking that's creating our emotional response to that. And it all seems incredibly real. It isn't. Does that do it?
So interesting. So interesting. Wow. Yeah, it's really, really interesting, isn't it? It's really interesting.
And then when you so effectively, the pure three principles, guys and girls, talk about Sydney Banks, who first had this kind of spontaneous experience of this, and he started teaching it. However, if you have had any experience yourself of mindfulness, for example, or meditation, or even various forms of Buddhist practice, you'll be very familiar with this. I am not my thoughts.
Yeah.
What's our real identity lies underneath our thinking, and it's only by calming our mind down and grounding ourselves that we're able to experience the reality of who we are. Now I'm going to give you just one more practical application of this from when I was teaching.
Right.
The last school I was in, pre-retirement, very difficult school, very, very tricky. And part of the reason it was tricky was because the kids were so bright. They were extremely good at misbehaving, and they were really subtle. really subtle about it. So I walked into this school, and I had a horrific lesson in my the first year, probably the first term of my first year, absolutely horrendous.
Wow.
And I came out, my mind was buzzing, because my thinking was activating my emotions. I was, obviously thoughts about myself. How can you be a teacher for that long and not be able to deal with the self-judgment, all this kind of stuff? Then I went home and just sort of read a little bit of, stuff about three principles. And then I allowed my mind to calm down. When my mind had calmed down, when my thinking had calmed down, I got this wisdom, this kind of instinct. Oh, that's what they were doing.
Right.
There was this little thing that they were doing that they knew to do that would just throw everything off.
Yeah.
That would allow them to riot, and do whatever, because the teacher couldn't process it. They were that bright.
Right.
And the point about it is your inner wisdom, your mind, your instinct will never let you down. It will always provide you with the answer, but you have to calm your thinking down enough to get to that point.
Wow. Wow. So it's calming the thinking down.
Calming the thinking down.
Mm-hmm.
And allowing your true self, if you like, your wisdom, your insight, your mind, to tell you what it needs to tell you.
Okay.
This also works brilliantly in relationships. If you're having relationship problems, I kind of instinctively realized when I started this work, I could probably heal a lot of the relationships in my life that are difficult. And there was one where I actually managed to do it, and I did it by becoming non-reactive. So this person that I was in a relationship, this friend of mine, I would get triggered all the time, get triggered by what they do, and become emotional and then reactive. And then I just calmed my thinking down. I just thought, okay, I'm actually going to have a conversation with this person. And I managed to do it in a really calm way. And I just expressed myself from how I was feeling about this, what this meant to me. And the person got it completely. They just got it, and they took responsibility for what was going on. And I know I would not have been able to do that prior to having that experience, prior to having that understanding and that insight. So this process works spontaneously, fortunately or unfortunately, on insight. You can't manufacture an insight. You can't sit down one day and you say, you know what, today I'm going to understand the principles. I'm going to have an insight. It doesn't work that way. It's spontaneous. If you expose yourself to the practitioners, if you read a little bit, if you get involved, after a while, things will start to click.
Right.
You hear the same thing explained in a number of different ways. Maybe somebody watching this might have an insight. You'll get that insight, and once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Now, Rob, I mean, you're a Londoner like me. I've kind of moved out, but not too far away. And half of my town is from London anyway, so I still feel a little bit connected. But London is probably one of the most diverse culturally cities in the world, I would imagine now. Does this stuff work cross-culturally? Because when I've been working in business or when I've just been mixing in different cultures, I find filters come up and people sometimes get offended, whereas like I wouldn't get offended, or in London someone won't get offended, but in the Far East, like someone takes it a different way. Does this stuff work cross-culturally in your opinion?
I would say it should do, because it's about thought, and we all think.
Right.
We may speak different languages, we may have different cultural references, but we all think.
Yeah. Okay.
So
slowing the thought down.
Yeah. It's slowing your thinking down. So again, this book I was reading this morning, Amy Johnson, talks about her children. If you've ever been around young children, or you've had young children, you'll see that they are, that they're not thinking selves, are they? They're just experiencing life. Exactly. And also their thoughts and their emotions change so quickly.
Yeah.
And the children themselves aren't perturbed by this at all.
Right.
and they're also very connected with each other
Yeah.
and with their parents and with their communities. They're very connected and they're very loving. And the point about this is you don't have to do anything. You don't have to learn any technique.
Mhm.
You have to peel all that away almost,
Right.
and then discover what was there all along.
Got it. This
That's
is
really what
really,
it is.
yeah, it's really, really interesting. Really interesting. So, with your clients, I mean, is there a heavy bias onto the kind of three principles process, or is everything you do pretty much bespoke?
Yeah, it's very much based on what the client wants. So I work with entrepreneurs, for example, people who want to either start businesses or develop their businesses, and this kind of stuff. It can be useful, and it can help people become more productive, more
Right.
creative, for example, more free in what they're doing. But they also are going to need some practical help and advice. They might need to set some goals. They might need a bit of accountability. You know, so it depends. I mean, my previous work as a teacher was very much about presence, how to be present when you're speaking to
Right.
people, how to connect with people, how to create rapport with people, all the things we've said, state management, that kind of thing. So that's all still there. The three
Yeah.
principles is something that kind of, I guess, underpins it.
Wow. It's very, very interesting. Really, really interesting indeed, Rob. So thank you for sharing and giving the viewers a little bit of an insight into that. Want to kind of skip into some current affairs at the moment.
Sure.
Recent report I read in America, going back to education, where New York City want to scrap the AP programs, which are the advanced placement programs in New York. They have a kind of two-tier system where they'll have the high achieving students in one set of classes, which is called AP, and then they'll have everybody else in other classes. And because of recent political, and won't get into politics at all either side, but because of kind of political undercurrents, it's now felt that in New York, we don't want to offend anyone who's not academically able to get into the AP. So they've kind of quashed it. So now everyone's together. What are your thoughts on that, Rob? I don't know if you were aware of that, or it's quite current in America.
Yeah, it's well, we've had this argument going on in the UK for a long, long time.
Really? Okay.
When I first went to school
Mm-hmm.
back in the 70s, I'll show my age. The school that I went to had been a grammar school, whoops,
Right.
and then became a comprehensive.
Okay.
So a lot of the teachers that were teaching me were grammar school teachers,
Mm-hmm.
and I could even at that young age, I could tell that they didn't know what was going on because they used to be teaching kids who'd been selected academically, and suddenly the great unwashed appear in their classrooms, and they're kind of like,
Yeah.
what am I supposed to do here? So I do know teachers who are in favour of mixed ability classes. Okay,
Right.
and there's quite a detailed set of arguments for mixed ability teaching, basically, which focus from memory on giving an opportunity for those children who are less able to learn from and be inspired by the children who are more able.
Right.
Now, for a large part of my career, I work with children who have special educational needs. And what would normally happen is that these children, for one reason or another, would be put into a bottom set. So there'd be a top set here, a bottom set there. These children felt stigmatized. Oh, we're bottom set children. We're stupid, and therefore their expectations were much, much lower. This is kind of this is not really political or controversial because it's just data. But one of the things they do in schools is they provide computer generated data based on the children's attainment in primary school, and they can predict what that child is going to achieve at GCSE.
Wow. So it's like an algorithm or something?
Yeah, it's been used for a long, long time. It's quite controversial, but effectively, you tend to reach a level at the end of primary school And if you're down here, if you're down here in the primary school, you're going to be down here at the end of secondary school. It's quite unusual to make that leap up. Now, there's been a lot of money put into the educational system to try and help those children who have the ability. Those children who really don't have the ability aren't necessarily going to reach those educational goals. So what I'm trying to say is setting makes sense. It makes sense for teachers. It makes sense for pupils. That's just my personal thing. So in terms of relating it to this, I think what's happening in New York is that they're having the same argument that we had. We want comprehensive education. We want the same opportunities for everyone. I can totally understand why they would want to do that politically. It doesn't work.
Right. Yeah, my kind of understanding would be it'd be very difficult, but it would work well, because you'd actually putting people together. You probably compound the problem on both ends of the spectrum, right? Because the guys who are going to distract and mess around are going to have a domino effect. And then the people that are really focused are probably going to throw the other people out even more in terms of they're kind of, because they're all in the same group.
Bear in mind, you've got one teacher in front of them trying to teach all different ability levels. It's impossible.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to stretch the ones who are really able, so they're not bored, because bright, bored children are an absolute nightmare. And at the same time, I want to support those children who need more. I can't be two different teachers.
Yeah. Yeah. And let's face it, I mean, I don't know what the American pay scales are like, but here in the UK and much of Europe, they're not great. They're not very competitive in terms of the job market, right?
No, not at all. Not at all. And as we've just been saying, the training is lacking.
Oh, really? Okay.
You think you're going to be trained to teach different abilities? You're not.
Wow. Incredible. Incredible. So, Rob, we are living in unprecedented times.
Indeed.
Which, when you think about it, we're probably always living in unprecedented times, but I think you know what I mean. And there's a lot of people out there that I talk to, that I come into communication with, who've just had huge curveballs. Some of them are at the top of their career. Some of them are struggling. Others are kind of trying to redefine themselves. Some really just don't know what's going to happen, right? But many of them have had huge curveballs. And for those people listening, what would you say to them? Because I know you're somebody you've had your own journey and your own fill of curveballs, without going into it. But you're somebody that's moved and kind of, gone through that and used it actually to propel yourself into where you want to be. What would you say to those people that just don't know what to do?
Okay, so this might sound like a bit of a trite answer, but it's related to Stoicism, which is something I've studied. There's a wonderful book you can read called The Obstacle is the Way, written by a guy called Ryan Holiday. And he is basically paraphrasing Marcus Aurelius all the way back to the Stoic philosophers. The obstacle is the way. So the thing that looks like it's you. Have you got it?
No, I'll tell you which one I've got.
Go on.
And I'm glad you mentioned it because I haven't started reading it yet, is The Perennial Seller. So Ryan Holiday. Is that the same guy?
Yeah, he's amazing.
Okay.
He's really worth reading. He's written two great books, The Obstacle is the Way and Ego is the Enemy. So this is a very successful guy in business who I don't think he I think he created his own demise rather than kind of experiencing it.
Okay.
But so when I was going through my difficulties, that was really my starting point. And the Stoic idea is that these problems are lessons, but the trick is to learn to see them in that way. And again, that can sound very superficial and you just have to look for the positive. But ultimately, if you look at it as something that's there to teach you something about yourself, that can actually improve you. I mean, I now added another layer onto that with a kind of spiritual perspective, and I look at these things as being messages from my creator that he wants me to deal with. He wants me to go through this in order to learn something. Now, what that something is probably will not be apparent right at the beginning, but it will become apparent over time if you persist. One of the things I've added into my morning routine is journaling. And what I love about journaling is that it gives me an opportunity to discover what I'm thinking, because it's very rare that you actually sit down and give yourself time to just write longhand what's going through your mind. And after a while, when your mind calms down, you discover what it is you're thinking, and you'll often find the reasons why these things are happening.
Wow. So true, isn't it? When you put pen to paper, I know some people like the electronic version, but I personally find that human connection of body onto paper, it does slow things down, and you sort of see your thoughts as it really is, right? It's incredible.
And I think so. First of all, it stops you identifying too much of your thinking, but secondly, it puts you in touch with what I was talking about earlier: your wisdom, your insight. What's really going on? What's this really about? Because there's the surface layer of the problem, and then there's the deeper layer of the problem. I mean, I'm just, we talk a little bit about spirituality, but one of the things I do, I'm Jewish and I keep Shabbat, which means that from Friday night until Saturday night, I turn off all my devices. I don't answer the phone. I don't carry. I don't cook. And so what's left is, obviously I'm, with my community, praying, whatever, but I also eat and I read and I spend time with myself.
Wow.
And I don't know what I would do without that time. So I think that's one of the other suggestions I would make to people is find some time in your week, if you can, where you just spend time with yourself.
Yeah, it's amazing, Rob. I think we could all learn from that principle of Shabbat that you guys have had for thousands and thousands of years, right? But in this modern era, just unplugging from the screens and just like going back to sitting and not cooking and stuff. I mean, it's just
reading.
Yeah. So you're allowed to read, are you? You can read when you.
Yeah, that's where I get most of my reading done.
Wow.
I'm pretty much addicted to my devices, unfortunately. All the pings, all the videos, all this, all of that.
Yeah.
And that feeling on a Friday when I just turn it all off is it's kind of it's freedom. It's amazing.
I've got a few Jewish friends online who they all practice Shabbat, and you can kind of see when they're going off. You can kind of see their last post, and then they'll come back, afterwards. On the Saturday evening, isn't it? They come back, and it's a nice reminder for all of us to, whatever our spiritual background or religious, identity is or non. It's a really good principle to remind us all to switch off and plug into source, self, thoughts, consciousness, and mind, which is really important. Did want to ask you a question about spirituality, and no spirituality in particular, by the way. But what I found with coaching is deep coaching. A lot of coaches will go really deep with clients, and they'll have incredible tools to work deeply with clients, but they won't go towards the spiritual side of things, where sometimes that's the place where they really should be going to. Have you got any observations on that, Rob, at all? Or any comments on that?
I came to a kind of realization on the last coaching training that I did, actually, that sometimes the word spirituality, the thought spirituality, can send us off into something that isn't actually what spirituality is.
Yeah.
So if I bring us back to that idea of the child with, without any attachment to thinking, without any attachment to ego, what's the nature of the connection that child has with its caregivers, with its friends? It's love.
Right.
That's really what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
So being able to create that loving connection with a client, you have to create it within yourself first of all. But if you can then share that with a client and allow the client to come into that,
Yeah.
they feel supported and they feel acknowledged, and that's all spiritual, isn't it? That's all about the deeper self.
Wow. Yeah. Very, very much so.
That's how I think of, because yeah, you're absolutely right. Without talking about specific religions or specific,
Mhm.
it comes down to love. It comes down to that connection,
Wow.
the depth of that connection.
Yeah. Wow. What a perfect way to kind of crescendo. Love it's the ultimate, isn't it, really?
As in, all you need is.
Yes, absolutely. We better not start singing that,
No,
because
I won't. I won't.
that will
I
take
won't do
us
that.
into another dimension. Rob, final thoughts, comments for viewers that are listening. There's so much gold here, guys. So, you can see Rob's links are on the screen. We've got his YouTube trailing down the bottom. And on the YouTube video, when we release this, then we'll have all of Rob's links. So do follow him. And he put some really interesting stuff up there. Rob, any final thoughts from yourself?
Yeah, I think if people are interested in hearing a bit more from me, then just pop over to my YouTube channel, because I'm making a video every week.
Oh, wait.
At,
Okay.
at this point in time, I've committed myself to doing that for 2 years.
Wow.
So I'm saying that here because that's what I'm going to do. And as you know, I'm moving.
Yes.
Changing country. So whatever happens, I'm going to be making a video once a week for 2 years. So you might get sick of me, but that's where to find me.
Thanks, Rob, so much for joining us. Thanks for sharing so openly. I really hope to have you on as a guest again, go a little bit deeper into certain aspects maybe, but really appreciate you serving us in this way. Thanks so much, Rob.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Well, we've had a deep dive into education, 3 principles, integrity-based coaching, and so much more. Really want to thank Rob. Do follow him. You can see that the links are on the screen. And we are just going to wrap this up. 1 secondo. Do subscribe to the channel because that's where you'll be getting all of our content. And we really want to make sure that you are in tune, connected, so that you can advance in your purpose, in your destiny, in your sphere, so that you can create an impact. It's not just about ourselves, it's about creating that wider impact, and that creates legacy. My name is Matt W.L. Nerona, hosting the one and only Mr. Rob Salter today. We are out of here, and we'll see you again on another live call, video, or maybe even in person at some point. That'd be pretty cool, wouldn't it?